Hello again, Michael Ware, Iowa Firearms Coalition. We've got with us a panel today of legislators that helped push through and make constitutional carry, among other things, a reality here in Iowa. We want to talk with you a little bit today and dispel some myths and help everybody understand. Senator Chris Cournoyer was joining us today. We have Representative Steve Holt and Richard Rogers, our board member and lobbyist. So let's cut right down to it. Steve, you floor managed this in the House. Would you be willing to give us a rundown? We people in Iowa and beyond need to understand what's going on here, and I think there's been some misinformation out there. Can you help us a little bit?
Goodness, the first thing I'd say is I think I've seen one article that was accurate on what this bill actually did when it comes to constitutional carry, and the rest of them have been way off. So you don't want to get your information from the news media, that's for sure. So House File 756 did a lot more than just constitutional carry. We can go over those things too, but the main thing to remember is that currently when folks want to get a handgun, they have to get either the permit to acquire or a permit to carry. Under our legislation that will become effective July 1st, that's the other thing people need to understand. It's not currently in effect. It takes effect July 1st, the start of the new fiscal year is when it becomes effective. Starting July 1st, the permit becomes optional. And what that means is if the individual does not want to get the permit, then they can go, they don't have to get the permit, but they still have to get a background check. If they go to that federally licensed firearms dealer, they still have to get a background check. So currently when you get a permit to acquire, a permit to carry, you go to the sheriff's office, the background check is done, then that permit is good for 5 years. And during that 5-year period, you can go to a federally licensed firearms dealer and you can get a handgun without additional background check. Under the new system, if an individual chooses not to get that permit to acquire or permit to carry, then each and every time they go to the firearms dealer to get that firearm, they will have to have a background check. That's important for folks to understand. The other thing, we have a lot of states that recognize our permit. So if you want to go out of state and you want to feel safe that you won't have any issues and that your permit would be recognized, and obviously you're going to need to continue to get that permit. So that's something that individuals are going to have to decide for themselves. But the good news is no more permission slips from government. Individuals get to make that decision whether they have that, whether they choose to get that permit or not. So those are the main points that I think are important. If we're talking about private sales, we've heard all sorts of stuff in the news about how this legislation gets rid of background checks, which it's just the opposite. In fact, I think background checks are going to go up under this legislation. And I also think that we'll continue to see a lot of firearms owners get those permits. So that for private sales, currently, if an individual is going to buy a handgun in a private sale, then the individual selling the gun is supposed to say, "May I see your permit, please?" And there's nothing in law that confirms that is being done. So under the new legislation, again, that takes effect July 1st, since the permit becomes optional, if you are selling in a private sale a handgun to an individual, then what the law says is that if you need to know them very, very well, because if you should have known that they were not lawful in being able to possess a firearm, then you've committed a Class D felony. So we think that that is a strong protection in private sales to actually likely increase background checks as well, because an individual might choose to just take that weapon on consignment to a federally licensed firearms dealer and get that background check done. So those are the highlights of the as far as the constitutional carry is concerned. We could also talk about all the other things that the legislation does as well, if you'd like to talk about that.
One quick thing, circling back, when you mentioned before, if let's say that I don't know my new neighbor well, and he wants to buy a pistol from me, and I'm not comfortable selling it to him because I don't know enough to say that I think that that's all right. Just so you know that the most recent paperwork from ATF regarding the 4473 form, which is what you fill out when you buy any handgun, buy any gun rather. They have a separate section on there now that are subsections specific to person-to-person transfers. So the newest forms that everybody's required to have are specifically set up for people to walk in off the street and say, "I'm selling this to this gentleman Can we run it through you? So dealers are capable of doing that now, and there's a specific section for that. So it's
Awesome.
really been streamlined, so about anybody can walk in and take care of that stuff on the fly. And I'm told most dealers aren't even asking for appointments for stuff like that. There's usually a cost because you're asking for some of their time, but
Right.
those things are set up and ready to go for anybody that wishes to use them.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, and I think two things that are really important here is that people that have permits, I mean, there's a lot of good reasons to continue getting permits, you know, for that reciprocity, and so you don't have to experience that background check every time you buy. And then also, you know, this bill is all about the rights of law-abiding citizens to keep and bear arms. It's not about criminals, because criminals are going to be criminals and they're going to do what they do. But this is the rights of law-abiding citizens that this bill is all about. And so, you know, I think it's really important. I think that, you know, all the doom and gloom that you're going to hear from some of the naysayers and, you know, some of those myths that you hear out there are going to turn out to be as untrue as they have been in the past. But you know, I think law-abiding citizens will continue to, you know, follow the law. And, you know, if they do have a question about somebody that they don't know well, I mean, first of all, I don't know why anybody would sell a firearm, but if they do sell a firearm and they're not sure, or they don't know the person well enough, you know, just take it to a federal firearms license, FFL, and get the background check done, that just to protect yourself and your rights for the future too.
Yeah.
The other thing I would note, you know, unfortunately, there have been several shootings in the last few weeks in our country, and in each of those cases, Colorado as an example, they have stringent gun control laws and all of these things, and none of these things prevent shootings because, as the senator said, law-abiding citizens follow these rules. The folks that are going to shoot up innocent people, it's also against the law to commit murder, but they do it anyway. So no law we put on the books is going to stop those type of individuals from committing these heinous crimes. It is simply restricting law-abiding citizens from being able to protect themselves. I always go back to this craziness when people tell me they feel safer in a gun-free zone because there's a sign up there. And I don't understand that line of thought, because the only people being disarmed by those signs are the law-abiding citizens. The folks that choose to shoot up innocent people don't care what those signs say. The same thing is true of this legislation. This is now recognizing law-abiding citizens' right to either choose to get a permit or not to get a permit based upon their own personal situation. So it is respectful of those law-abiding citizens.
You're so right about that. When both of you guys mentioned that, I mean, I mean, as a senator, as a House rep, I know you know that, Richard. I know you know that. But when my family from Chicago calls me up and we visit, and they tell me I'm statistically safer walking down the streets with the American flag draped across my back in Kabul than I am in the city that I live in, because of the number of shootings and the number of murders that happen. I think that it's a pretty self-explanatory tale. We don't need to draw it out to understand the moral of the story here is gun-free zones do not work. I mean, they're the epitome of bad. It's really horrible.
Absolutely. And we're seeing more and more. I mean, across our country, we're seeing situations where law enforcement are going to be overwhelmed, and more. There's a reason why millions of Americans that have never owned firearms before have purchased them over the last few months, because we're seeing what's going on in our country. People feel the need to protect themselves and their families by having a firearm. And, you know, now they won't have to wait for a background check, they won't have to wait for the sheriff's department to approve their permit. They can go to that federally licensed firearms dealer and get that background check and get a weapon quickly if they feel the need to do so and be safe. So you're going to see more and more Americans buy firearms because there is a recognition in our country. Unfortunately, I know many of us would never thought we would see the day and some of the things that we're seeing in our country today, but we have to recognize that the first responsibility for defending ourselves and our family lies with us. And law enforcement may be overwhelmed, may not be able to respond, or may be prevented from responding in some cases by politicians who are either too cowardly to allow them to respond or are making a political statement. So that is all the more important reason that we did this. I would also, again, remind folks that in a lot of states that have permit processes, that folks who don't like firearms, mostly Democrats, have made it so difficult to get a firearm through their permit process that it's basically impossible. Hawaii comes to mind. They haven't issued a permit in years, other states. So that's why we think it's so important to have constitutional carry, so that it becomes much more difficult if those are ever in power in Iowa that don't like the Second Amendment, don't like firearms. It will be much more difficult for them to move back from constitutional carry than it would be just to take the permit process and tinker with it until they make it so onerous that it's impossible for a law-abiding citizen to get a firearm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd like to follow up the representative's point. I mean, about law, the right to be able to protect your family. And, sometimes law enforcement is minutes away when seconds count. And I think, too, to that end, we've got more people purchasing firearms, but I think law-abiding citizens also have the self-awareness to know when they need training. And we're seeing more and more people taking the training classes. I started with basic pistol when I, just wanted to get my license. And then I realized with basic pistol, that was not enough. I needed more training. So I took personal protection in the home, realized that there was a lot more that I needed to know, took personal protection outside the home. And then I eventually became a basic pistol instructor because I wanted to help people like me, especially women. I really particularly get a lot of gratification out of teaching women's classes, but teaching women how to safely handle a firearm and be able to use it and not have it used against you should the need ever arise. So I think that having the self-awareness, law-abiding citizens are the ones that are going to understand and really fully respect the responsibility that it comes with owning firearms and keeping themselves and other innocent people safe, and making sure that they handle them responsibly by taking the training necessary to make sure that they will be ready when and if the time comes that they have to protect themselves and their families.
Richard, do you have anything?
Well, both the senator and representative, what they've had to say bring several things to mind. What Representative Holt said earlier about other states having he was talking about may issue permit systems where it's basically you have to have a suitable reason, suitable to some bureaucrat somewhere or a chief law enforcement officer in order to get a permit. And in Hawaii, all states have permit systems now. Illinois was the last state. The courts made them do it, but not all states actually issue permits. And Hawaii is a case where they haven't issued one in many years. But Iowa used to be that way. And Representative Holt talked a little bit about not wanting to fall back, and that this bill helps us reach a new plateau where we won't be so easily pushed back. A dozen years ago, only 30,000 Iowans had permits to carry. I guarantee you there wasn't a whole lot of firearms instruction widely available. Certainly not very varied instruction available at that time. Now we have over 400,000 people with those permits. And they're not all carrying a gun every day, but they could, or they could have it in their car. Now that it's true they won't need it. But we expect, as you said, the permits to stay relatively level and probably to climb over time as they have in other states, because there are several advantages. You can use the permit in the 33 other states that honor Iowa's permit to carry. You can use it when you go to the dealer to show that you've had a background check, and then you don't have to get in line and wait on the not so instant national instant check system. There's also the fact, and we'll probably talk more about this in future communications from Iowa Firearms Coalition, but having the Iowa permit is the only thing that could keep you out of possibly being picked up for violating the Federal Gun-Free School Zones Act, which says you can't basically go armed with a gun within 1,000 feet of a school. If you don't have it unloaded in a locked container and you're within 1,000 feet of school property and you're not on your own property and you're not law enforcement, that's a federal felony. The first version of that law was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, but Congress tweaked it, passed it again, and it hasn't been challenged. So it may still be unconstitutional, but it's in force. And so that's a good reason to have a permit issued or have a permit issued by the state, because that is a get out of jail free card on that. And otherwise it becomes quite impractical. And that's the point of a lot of these anti-gun laws, anti-liberty laws, is it makes it impractical to carry a defensive tool with you throughout the day.
Absolutely.
Was there anything? Oh, I do too remember something I was going to ask you, Representative Holt. Beyond the constitutional carry premise provided in House File 756, there were other vital pieces there. I want to see if you would touch on those real quick.
Sure. I think all of these things will make Iowans safer. Absolutely. I think this was a public safety bill all the way around. The first thing I would talk about is currently under current law, law enforcement officers that are on duty are allowed to carry on school grounds. What we said was a law enforcement officer, both on or off duty, should be allowed to carry on school grounds, and also reserve police officers should be allowed to carry on school grounds, whether on or off duty. Look, the folks that you want to have armed in a school when a situation takes place where an individual starts shooting inside of a school and harming innocent children and staff of the school, you want law enforcement officers to be the ones that are armed and ready in those situations. So why not allow them, whether they're on duty or off duty, to carry their weapon? Why not allow the reserve officers who have very similar training to our active duty officers to be able to carry? So we said law enforcement officers and reserve officers, whether on duty or off duty, can carry their firearms on school grounds. We believe that will make schools safer because, again, those are the folks that you want to have armed when a situation breaks out. We also are allowing EMTs that are assigned to tactical teams, law enforcement tactical teams. We're going to allow those EMTs, if they choose to and the team chooses to, allow them to go through training and also be able to get a professional permit to carry so that they can carry in those situations. That will make that entire tactical team safer, as well as those EMTs. And then finally, we thought, currently folks that have Section 8 housing, the landlord could actually say you're not allowed to have a firearm in housing when he's getting the Section 8 assistance. We didn't think that was fair for those citizens not to be able to have a firearm and exercise their Second Amendment rights, sort of based on their economic situation. So we said, you're not going to be allowed to do that anymore. If the person can otherwise lawfully carry a firearm, then if a landlord is taking Section 8 housing, they cannot prevent that individual from having a firearm. That doesn't affect other landlords that don't take Section 8 housing. Obviously, that's a situation that would be up to them. Again, all of these things I want to emphasize to folks. None of these things, including constitutional carry, are effective until July 1st. We are under current law until July 1st, and that is when the implementation of all this takes effect.
Senator, do you have any parting thoughts?
Well, to Representative Holt's point about reserve deputies, I was a reserve deputy in the Scott County Sheriff's Office for 5 years, and we went through all the same training that a certified officer went through, and we had to certify on our firearms every single year, and we went through all the training. So absolutely, these are the people that you want keeping your kids safe, whether they're on duty or not on school grounds. I mean, the kids are safer, the school grounds are safer, and it certainly would make somebody that wants to go on school grounds and cause harm to think twice about it before choosing that as a place to go. But I think this is great legislation. I've gotten a lot of emails and a lot of calls and a lot of comments on the street from people that are very happy that we're going into this direction, continuing to, provide provide freedom to law-abiding citizens and their right to keep and bear arms, and continue to strengthen Second Amendment rights in the state of Iowa. So I'm really glad to see that the legislature moved forward on this legislation, and that the governor was very willing to sign it as soon as it hit her desk this year.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Richard, anything else before we sign off?
Well, I'd like to thank both the representative and the senator for helping push this through, and as well as their colleagues. Senator Cournoyer mentioned her law enforcement background. And for those who don't know, Representative Holt had several years in law enforcement after his career in the Marines. And I know he worked very diligently with law enforcement to address their concerns about this bill and to work out the language and to ensure that it didn't have deleterious effects on our ability to back the blue and enforce the laws that exist. But we didn't change anything about who may possess a gun. Really, there isn't a lot of going to be a lot of practical difference when this law goes into effect for most people. Those who need to arm up immediately would be able to do so without waiting the 3-day period before their permit to purchase becomes active and so on. But for most people, it's not going to make a lot of difference. But what it does do is the state has now recognized that the right to keep bear arms is truly a right and not a mere privilege that they can either grant or refuse to grant. And that is important. And again, for the reasons that we talked about earlier about not going backwards, Representative Holt. So that's very important. And but we did not do anything to change who may possess a weapon or what they may do with a weapon. You still it has to be lawful use of a weapon. So it's going to be like everything else. Blood is not going to run in the streets like it never has before when anybody made any of these other changes. And I thank you both very much and your colleagues for pushing this forward, and to the governor for signing it.
Yeah.
Yes.
If I could respond to, and just say that, you know, I spent 20 years in the Marine Corps. I spent 4 years in law enforcement. I was extremely sensitive to the concerns of law enforcement, and virtually everything they requested, we put into the legislation. We took the federal language on who's prohibited from having a firearm on the federal level. We put that into state law. We quickened the system by which the trooper or the law enforcement officers can access information within their patrol car to see whether somebody should not be able to possess a weapon. There were actually some information that wasn't being reported. We found out to the federal background system check. We fixed that. So everything that law enforcement requested, we put into this legislation. I would definitely, as I know the senator is extremely concerned for our law enforcement officers, and to not do anything to make their job any more difficult. So we believe that we satisfied all of those concerns for the law enforcement community as we were moving through. I had many hours of meetings with law enforcement to make sure we got it right.
Fantastic. Thank you all. I appreciate you guys all taking the time to spend with us. And as mentioned earlier, I appreciate Governor Reynolds signing this. It hit her desk and it was taken care of in very short order. We're tickled about that. We're glad. Before we go, Senator, would you be willing to show us the shirt that you're sporting?
Okay, here we go. Here's my shirt. It's range time.
I like it.
I picked
Awesome.
I picked it up. I'm the co-chair of the Legislative Sportsman's Caucus, and we have invited all the legislators in the Iowa legislature, both in the Senate and the House, to go out and shoot with us tomorrow night. And the good news is that we've got several legislators that have never shot a gun before, about 14 of them. So we're going to go out and we've got some instructors coming out and some range officers, and we're going to show them how to shoot a gun and show them why we love to do it so much. So
that's fantastic.
Bringing new people. What's that?
It's bipartisan. Right?
You know what? It's about 50% men, 50% women, and it's about half and half, Democrats and Republicans. So I think it's going to be a nice bipartisan event, and hopefully we'll have some new shooters and new fans of the Second Amendment and all these great laws that we're passing afterwards.
Awesome. I love it. All right, we better sign off. Richard Rogers is with us tonight. Thank you, Richard. Senator Cournoyer and Representative Steve Holt. Michael Ware, Firearms Coalition. Everybody stay safe. Thank you.